Hi there, I'm Alex Brandon, and this is All Things Funky. It's been a while. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about synthesizers. But first, an update! That's just a taste of my upcoming guitar album, Omega Force. Over the years, I've been inspired by guitar music and games inspired by that guitar music. Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Dream Theater, Animals as Leaders, Chimp Spanner, Afterburner, Vapor Trail, Lords of Thunder, the list goes on. And this album is all about that. To prepare, I've gathered some great heavy metal libraries, instrument-wise, such as Shreddage 2 by the great Impact Soundworks, and Heavier 7 Strings by 3-Body Technolo, I think that's what it's called, and some great amp plugins like Bias Effects and UAD Marshall emulators. And prepped my Ibanez Gem Jade by having it set up by one of the best techs in Austin, Mark Earlywine. He's kept Willie Nelson's Trigger guitar going for 10,000 shows, and he's going to make Jade sing. Now, on to the show!
Frankly, synthesizers were as much a part of music to me as anything else. A few things stood out, like Axel F, Escape from New York, or Tangerine Dream. But I never really cared where these sounds were coming from growing up. They were just cool sounds. I wrote a few songs in the computer programming language BASIC, as did my old friend Jason Emery, except he used Apple Basic, and inspired by his example, I'd record arcade music and later Nintendo music using a portable tape recorder. Game music was my jam long before it became popular. Things really started getting interesting when I asked for and luckily got an Ad-Lib music synthesizer card in 1987. This was the first widespread commercially available sound card, and I loved it. My friend Jason Emery had one first, hooked up to the family CompuAd. I was hooked, and I began writing quite a few, mostly half-finished pieces, which are now available as the Ad-Lib collection on Bandcamp, so go check it out. I'd also used the Instrument Maker, but again, I didn't care or focus on what the controls did. I just tweaked until I found something that I liked. So my electronic musical journey really began here. The Ad-Lib used an OPL2 synthesizer chip, built by Yamaha. In my opinion, it didn't sound quite as cool as the chip on the Sega Genesis, even though the product number of the chip was higher than the Genesis, YM3812 versus YM2612, or OPN2. Some people like Andreas Molnar managed to get the Ad-Lib awfully close to the Genesis, though, and the results are in games like the first one I ever worked on, Tyrion. Under the hood, the Genesis had 4 operators on 6 channels, whereas the Ad-Lib had 2 oscillators on 9 channels, or 11 depending on your configuration. See, now I'm getting technical. Again, I didn't know any of this in '87, and honestly, I didn't care. What mattered was the sound, plain and simple. Engineers can build it, and I'll either like it or I won't. To a degree, I'm still this way, but I'm learning a little more about it because, well, it's 30 years later, right? So now let's fast forward a little bit. Yes, I got into mod files. And kept writing music on computers. That was fun. But mods are sample-based, not synth-based. My first real synthesizer was a gift from my grandfather and my dad. And it too was more sample-oriented than synth-oriented. My grandfather, Robert Brandon, died in the early 90s, and before I graduated high school, my dad took me to Chuck Levin's Washington Music Center in Wheaton, Maryland, and bought me an EMU Proteus MPS Plus Orchestral. He said it was from my grandfather, but really, it was from him. He believed in me and my passion for music, and I haven't forgotten it. I had a choice between that and a Korg M1. The piano sounded better on the Proteus, but sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I got the M1. Who knows? Sadly, I don't have any of my Proteus songs from that era, but that's where today's history lesson ends. Going through the whole thing would take more than one episode. I'm stopping here and continuing all that in another episode to prove a point. The point is, everything I wanted growing up, and way too much more, is now available and pretty easy to acquire. Here in my studio I have just two hardware synths, a workstation, the Roland Phantom 7, and the Studio Logic Sledge. Very different beasts. Workstation synthesizers have synth instruments, sampled instruments, and a ton of features like an onboard sequencer and sampling engines. So you can have a one-stop shop for recording and performing all kinds of music. Synths like the Sledge are designed only with the synthesis portion in mind. I got the Sledge because it has a lot of big knobs that are easy to manipulate and each of which performs a single function. It also has an engine by Waldorf, and eons ago at Ion Storm Austin, I inherited a wonderful Waldorf microwave synthesizer from the recently closed Looking Glass Studios. And I was quite fond of the synthesis on that Waldorf. So on the Sledge, there's almost no menu diving for sound creation. It has a good variety of synthesis methods such as Wavetable and FM. And since it's digital, I can save my patches for later. I'll get into more detail about these in a bit. Now, aside from the hardware, there's also software. Using a format by Steinberg called Virtual Studio Technology, or VST, it's kind of like PostScript for printers. It allows different pieces of music software to talk to each other. In this case, you can have VST effects, or in this example, instruments. That big, rich sound you heard at the beginning is Omnisphere 2.5 by Spectrasonics, the Korg M1 of its generation, meaning it's a Swiss Army knife and can do just about anything. If you need a single synth, this is the one to get. I can't even go over all the features in this video by a long shot, but it does have a cool new aspect about it in that it ties directly into the controls for my Sledge. Back in the day, you had to do quite a bit of work to get a hardware synth to fully interface with the software. I can put Omnisphere in hardware mode and control Omnisphere with the knobs on the Sledge instantly. Now, with all of this awesomeness, how could that be bad? Herein lies the irony. There's Omnisphere and its 14,000 sounds, and there's also the Sledge and the Phantom, which have thousands of sounds as well. And this is only scratching the surface. My point is, everything I ever wanted is pretty much here now, and it couldn't be more crippling. It's incredible, and I truly believe that if I were given the same limitations as people who only had a piano or guitar, I'd be making more music. That's kind of bizarre, isn't it? Pretty profound. Wanting to break through boundaries and achieve what my childhood idols had at their disposal, only to be left scratching my head in confusion about what to choose. To combat this, I'm writing a synth album and specifically focusing on inspirations as well as trying to make new sounds. But oddly enough, these videos are also a way to help clarify and focus creativity. We're in a fascinating new age, not just of the introduction of new tech and creative expression, but simultaneously how to cope with that new tech. Can't have one without the other. And as a kid, even as a teen, all that mattered was just making sounds that I thought were cool because I'd heard them before and wanted to emulate them. We're pretty much all doing that, right? Most of us anyway. Now, inspiration comes from people like Jacob Collier, but that teaches me that the next frontier is not found in what has come before. So let's end this initial synth episode by taking you through how I'd create an instrument on the Sledge. There's a lot of great Sledge videos by George Hall found in the description below, but from this point on, we're off script and into adventure time with the Studio Logic Sledge.
Welcome to the Sledge. As Jordan Root has put it, it's got a pretty big sound. Jordan did it better, but hey, that was fun. Okay, so what we have here is I will transfer the view more onto this portion of the controls. But one of the reasons that this is an easier keyboard to understand the synth aspects is because you've got your sections very largely mapped out with large controls, and you also have a number of presets because it's digital. It's not an analog synthesizer, so you can save a lot of your presets. Now, I'm not going to do a full tutorial on this, but it did allow me to achieve a certain number of interesting things when it came to trying to replicate old sounds of video games. So let's start with that.
Okay, so we have a little bit better view of the sections of this, and put simply, the things that generate the sounds start with the oscillators, and there's 3 of them here. Then we go into our mixer section, which means that we can mix the levels of these oscillators or turn them on or off. We've got a little noise generator here. We've got a filter section here, which is where some fun can be had with manipulating what happens with the waveform sections, the wavetable sections, and the FM aspects of this, which gives it a little bit more of a Sega Genesis kind of a sound. That's pretty cool. Plus, we have our envelopes and our effects. And that's the basics behind most analog synths, really, in terms of just how they're constructed. There's other forms, such as particle or granular synthesis. And of course, being a Waldorf product, we have wavetables. With the introduction of the PPG, they were able to introduce a new form of synthesis called wavetable synthesis. But you can learn all about that other stuff in tons of other videos. The first thing that I wanted to do was to just sort of play around with the FM sounds and sort of get sort of an Echo the Dolphin sound, which is definitely not exactly like the Genesis, but I liked the gradual ramp up pad type sound. Like, and in addition to that, I also was curious about the soundtrack for the game Lightspeed by Microprose, because on the AdLib, again, another FM chip that resides on computers and makes music for games, is that there's a Sisispio alien race that also has different types of fading up pads. Like, so that was pretty neat. And it certainly doesn't sound exactly like that, but that's sort of the journey, right? Is the sound design and trying to figure out, what elements make these sounds that we remember as kids, or just sounds that we want to play around with now, because there's all kinds of things that you can do. So if I have this here and I decide to turn these off, but turn the noise generator on, oops, let's see, there we go. And you can do sound designy stuff and all manner of bountiful things, which is fascinating. But here's where some of the really cool stuff came into play, other than just fiddling around with the arpeggiator. You can put it in latch mode somewhere around here, but I'm just holding down the pedal. And the 2 most obvious things that people notice when it comes to synthesizers is cutoff and resonance. So I turn this to the right. And then the resonance gives it an even more so it gets more sound designy as you turn up the resonance, but it gives it that standard open and closed filter sound that we're so familiar with over the years. So that's, of course, another fun little thing to do. This is Wave 1. These are all custom patches that I've made. Hopefully using the pedal doesn't shake the camera too much. And then we'll go on to, say, Roland 1. But here's where things really started to get interesting. I started looking up the nature of Nintendo waveforms as they're generated on that chip. And this is something, again, that a ton of not only my colleagues, but a lot of VGM fans have really nerded out about, and they know far more than I do. Like the people at Plug, which makes some really, really great emulations of chips and software for their VST plugins. So this, as I started looking this up, I thought, well, wait a minute. There's a triangle wave for the standard bass on the Nintendo, and when I just decided to play around with the settings of the triangle wave here, I came up with a standard Nintendo bass. Something like that, from Ice Climber. That's a fun one. And in addition to that, there's the pulse wave, which excuse my clumsy playing here, but all of that really led to some really, really awesome discoveries. Just the fact that this modern synthesizer can generate tones that are so similar to NES. And of course, if that's the way synthesizers work, naturally they would sound incredibly close together in terms of their sound quality. So there's a billion more things that this can do. Oh yeah, the FM aspects of this are pretty cool too. So when you have wavetable generated on this first oscillator, and it's added to where you can do FM by oscillator 1, and that of course does frequency modulation. That doesn't necessarily mean that something completely new is being generated, but an additional waveform is being layered on top of that to adjust the existing waveform, which is a wavetable sound. So that's kind of wicked, and you get some really nifty. And as you change this, and then as you change the pulse width here, you can speed it up. Or rather the LFO, excuse me. I forgot to mention LFO or low frequency oscillator, which is essentially sort of a property that as you change it, it adjusts the parameters of other things at different rates. Little sound designy there for sure. The standard stuff that we're used to. Rather. Then you have, because this is a polysynth and not a monosynth, excuse me. Go ahead, chase a dream. In Levis Jeans, if I was to talk like, what's that guy's name? Ken Nordine, that's right, for the Levi's commercials. Pretty cool stuff, and it's all digital. It is not, there's a certain depth and warmth that comes from, say, Dave Smith instruments with their analog designs that some people say isn't present on stuff like the Sledge, and I can certainly see where they're coming from, but I am quite fond. I've been fond of Waldorf synthesizers ever since the Microwave XT that I was able to use at Ion Storm when Deus Ex Invisible War was getting constructed, because that was a hand-me-down from Looking Glass Studios and used by the great Eric Brocious, who hopefully will have interviewed on one of these videos. So hope you enjoyed that little mini demonstration of the Sledge and the ability to create old school sounds on it. I'm going to have a lot more coming down the pipe when it comes to synthesis, because we are going to take a look at not just the Roland, but this beauty, which is also a Waldorf, the Iridium. So definitely stay tuned for a special on that.